Let's dig into the true story behind what is, without a doubt, the most famous archaeological discovery of all time. Seriously, it's a tale of obsession, of sheer desperation, and a partnership so strange, so unlikely, you'd swear it was made up.
Okay, so to really get just how incredible this discovery was, you have to know what the experts thought back in 1912. And this quote? This is from Theodore Davis, the guy who had the official permit to dig in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. After years of finding some of the biggest tombs, he basically went on record and said, "That's all, folks, the book is closed." Everyone believed the valley had given up all its secrets.
And that's the big question, isn't it? If the world's top authority declared the site completely tapped out, how in the world did someone stumble upon the only intact royal tomb packed with treasures beyond anyone's wildest dreams just a decade later? Well, the answer lies with two men who just refused to believe the story was over.
Right, let's set the scene. This wasn't just one guy's opinion. It was pretty much the gospel truth among archaeologists. The Valley of the Kings was finished. Done.
You have to understand, for more than 100 years, this little valley was the absolute epicenter of Egyptian exploration. It coughed up dozens of tombs, but by the 1920s, the consensus was totally clear. The party's over. The exciting new finds were happening elsewhere. To keep digging here, people thought you were a stubborn fool. The place had been picked clean.
And this is where our story really kicks off, with the two men who were about to defy all of that expert opinion. A true odd couple, brought together by, of all things, their own personal misfortunes.
I mean, just look at how different these two were. On one side, you've got Howard Carter, the digger. He was brilliant, yeah, but also famously difficult. A self-taught genius who was basically an outcast from the official archaeological world. And on the other side, Lord Carnarvon, the peer. His complete polar opposite. A super-wealthy earl who just needed a new hobby after a nasty car crash meant he couldn't stand the cold English winters anymore. Carter needed money, Carnarvon needed an expert. They were the perfect mismatch.
It's actually kind of wild to think about how they ended up together. You know, if Carter hadn't so stubbornly resigned his government job over a point of principle, he wouldn't have been looking for work. And if Carnarvon had never crashed his car, he would have just stayed in England with his beloved racehorses. It was their separate, personal disasters that created the exact conditions for them to team up.
So the partnership was on. They began this obsessive hunt for the tomb of a pretty minor boy king named Tutankhamun. But it turned into this grueling, frustrating search that would push both of them right to their breaking points.
So they kicked things off in 1917, and for 5 long, brutal seasons in that Egyptian heat, they found next to nothing. I mean, years are just dragging on, hope is fading fast, and by the summer of 1922, Lord Carnarvon had had enough. He'd poured a massive fortune into the sand, with basically zero to show for it. He was ready to pull the plug.
And to really get a sense of their effort, just look at this number, 70,000 tons. That's how much sand and rock Carter and his crew systematically moved and sifted, clearing the valley floor right down to the bedrock. And for 5 years, all of that backbreaking, monumental work led to absolutely nothing. A dead end.
This all leads to this incredibly dramatic meeting at Highclere Castle. And yes, that is the real Downton Abbey. Carnarvon basically calls Carter in to tell him it's all over. But Carter, who is just completely obsessed and convinced he's this close, makes one last, desperate plea. He points to this final, tiny, unexplored patch on his map, and, in this incredible Hail Mary, offers to pay for the final season himself. And that sheer conviction, that obsession, it changes Carnarvon's mind. He agrees. One last season, one last roll of the dice.
And so, that final season began, and all those years of frustration, they were about to pay off in the most spectacular way you can possibly imagine. After years of absolute silence, the breakthrough happens with just breathtaking speed. On November 1st, they start clearing that final patch of ground. Just 3 days later, a young water boy, digging a little spot for his water jar, hits something hard with his heel. It's a stone step. By the very next day, they've uncovered a whole staircase leading down to a plastered doorway, and it's stamped with the intact, unbroken seals of the royal necropolis.
Carter is smart. He immediately has his team bury the entrance again to keep it safe, and he fires off this now legendary telegram to Lord Carnarvon back in England. I mean, can you just feel the raw excitement in that clipped, pay-by-the-word language? At last, wonderful discovery. Carnarvon and his daughter immediately book passage and start racing towards Egypt. So, fast forward to November 26th. Carnarvon is there right at his side. Carter stands before a second sealed door deep inside the passage. He carefully makes a tiny hole, holds up a candle to check for bad air, and then he peers into the darkness. And for a moment that must have felt like an absolute eternity to everyone else waiting, he says nothing. He is just struck completely silent. Finally, Carnarvon can't take the suspense anymore, and he asks that famous question.
And Carter gives his immortal and frankly, ridiculously understated reply. What was he seeing? Strange golden animals, life-size statues, and gold everywhere. The glint of gold. It was a room just overflowing with thousands of priceless artifacts. The antechamber to the tomb of Tutankhamun, which had been hidden, untouched for over 3,300 years.
The discovery was one of the greatest scientific triumphs in history. But the story that really grabbed the world's imagination, it was something much, much darker. A myth that would overshadow the truth for a century. The curse of the pharaohs.
So here's how it all got started. Just 5 months after the tomb was opened, Lord Carnarvon was shaving and he accidentally sliced open an infected mosquito bite on his cheek. Now this is before antibiotics, so sepsis set in, and tragically, he died. Here's the thing though, Carnarvon had sold the exclusive story rights to the Times of London, which made every other journalist in Egypt furious. So his sudden, strange death, it gave them the perfect angle. A sensational story they could run with, no facts needed. The Pharaoh's revenge.
And the myth just exploded as any death, even remotely connected to the tomb, was added to the list. But when you actually look at the myth versus the documented reality, the whole thing just falls apart. A visitor's mysterious fever? Well, that was actually pneumonia. A team member's death from tomb toxins? Nope, it was pleurisy, an illness he'd had for years. And Howard Carter himself, the guy who was most exposed to any supposed curse, he lived for another 17 years.
You know, the hard data really tells the true story here. A study back in 2002, published in a British medical journal, looked at the lifespans of the people who actually entered the tomb. The result? Their average survival time after going inside was almost 21 years. Howard Carter lived for 17 more, and Lord Carnarvon's daughter, Lady Evelyn, who was one of the very first people to step inside, she lived for another 57 years. Statistically speaking, there was no curse. Period.
In the end, the true legacy of this discovery is so much more important than any spooky myth. Carter's meticulous 10-year process of cataloging over 5,000 items, it set a whole new scientific standard for how archaeology should be done. The find also sparked a huge wave of Egyptian nationalism, which helped make sure Egypt's treasures would finally stay in Egypt. And it unleashed Tutmania all over the globe, influencing everything from art and fashion to creating the very idea of a museum blockbuster exhibition.
So, that brings us to a final thought. Look, the Curse of the Pharaohs is an irresistible story, right? A tale of ancient magic and revenge that has captivated us for a solid century. But the real story, the one about two unlikely partners whose stubborn belief literally changed science, politics, and culture forever, that's the truth. It really makes you wonder which one has the more lasting power.
And so, another chapter closes. For more journeys into history's forgotten files, please like and subscribe. Your next story awaits.